if it was released in November, 3 years since Atomic Habits is released, over 5 million copies. It seems like on the outside looking in, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would say, like, James has made it. This is the pinnacle author, New York Times bestseller. But like, I think there's also this reality that we all understand too, that nothing's perfect, no matter how quote unquote successful you can become. It doesn't just suddenly make all of life's problems go away. It makes a lot of them, maybe. But I'm really curious now, like, maybe the reality of being successful on this side of it. I'm curious, is there anything that like now keeps you up at night? Is there anything now that is really hard for you on the other side of success that maybe most people don't think about when everyone maybe isn't there yet, or they imagine what it's like? Maybe they don't have the full picture of what it's like to be in your shoes now on the other side of things.
Well, I mean, first of all, I am incredibly fortunate and lucky to be in the position
Mm,
I'm in. I like that. I don't know if that quote or line of thinking where it's like the quest of life is just to continually solve greater and greater problems or to
mm,
upgrade your problems.
right.
So, it's not like I don't have problems to deal with anymore, but it's just such a better class of problems or such a fortunate opportunity set to be dealing with. One of my biggest problems right now is saying no.
Mm,
Am perpetually a slow learner in this regard. It feels like I'm always 2 or 3 or 4 months behind upgrading my no or setting a tighter filter than I should have. So there's this weird dynamic where success kind of eats itself. Like
mm,
you do something well, so launch a podcast that goes well, or you start a blog that gets popular, or you launch a best-selling book. And because that thing did well, a lot of new opportunities come your way. People are like, "Hey, do you want to talk at this thing? Or are you interested in, partnering on this project? Or what do you think about this cool event or whatever?" And each thing sounds pretty interesting. And it's like, feels cool to be invited to stuff or to be asked to do
mhm,
things. And so you want to say yes to a lot of them, and you end up getting on the hook for all of these things.
mm,
And it eliminates any of the time that you had to work on the thing that got you the opportunities in the first place. So now,
right.
now you don't have any time to do the thing that got you there. And so that's what I mean when I say like success kind of eats itself in that way. You need to have a very tight filter.
Mm,
And it also is challenging because I have felt this. I was joking with my wife the other day how for 10 years, I was like, somebody please pay attention to this thing that I'm making.
yeah.
And now I'm like, all of you, many of you are paying way too much attention to the things that I'm making. Let's
Right.
all just chill out a
Yeah.
little bit. We don't need to focus on every word. And there's this thing where early in your career, you basically have to say yes to every opportunity you can. You
Mm,
got to try to chase down every little possible window of opportunity and make the most of it.
mm,
And then you have this breakout hit, and it's like, oh, now all the opportunities are inbound instead of outbound. And you need to like have a very tight filter and protect your time more.
mm,
So it's hard to switch that mode. So I think that's one thing that a new problem. But again, I feel like it's a good problem to have, but
yeah.
it is something I've struggled with a little bit. And then I would say the second thing is it is interesting to learn like which things money can solve or resources can solve or connection can solve and which things they can't, because there are a lot of problems, so to speak, or challenges in life that actually those things are still useless for. The one thing that I was talking about recently, again with my wife, I was saying like money can provide certain opportunities, but it can't give you courage, can't make the decision for you. It can't get you to commit fully to something. And you'd be surprised how much that still comes up in life. Like the problem is not necessarily whether the opportunity is there, it's whether you're committed to making the most of it. The problem is not necessarily whether you have the ability or the talent to do something. It's like whether you have the courage to bet on yourself and actually go all in on it. And all of those mental hangups, that whole mental side of the creative process and of being an entrepreneur or making things, that all still exists in almost exactly the same way, at least for
Mm,
me. And yeah, you still need just as much courage and just as much guts. In some ways, I don't know that you need more, but you need it in a different way than you did before. But one
mm,
of the great things about starting out and not having a brand or not really having a name is that you have very little to lose. And so you can just go for it. Who cares if it
mm,
doesn't work? What's the difference? But once you have this like success, once you have expectations, so to speak, for what you do and how good it should be and whether you should be like doing it at a high level, then you get out of creation mode and you get into like protection mode
Mm,
where you're trying to protect what you have rather than trying to create something new.
yeah.
And in that way, I think success can kind of be, to a certain degree, it can be a handicap or toxic for creators. I think it's why you see, like a lot of Hollywood studios, they just do remakes of hit movies. Why? Because they're trying to protect their asset. They don't want to do something like really creative and new. They just want to do something that keeps them in business.
Yeah.
And that same phenomenon happens for many, many individual creators as well. Once
Yeah.
something starts working, now you're worried about losing what you have rather than just creating something.
Yeah. I've always imagined that, like, especially, I think your career is a great example. Like, I always very much, it probably sounds silly, but it's true. I have empathy for people who go viral and the people who have this flash in the pan moment. And then all of a sudden they don't even realize that they've just signed up for the rest of their life being known for this one goofy
Hmm.
thing or one cool thing or something. And it takes a lot to kind of try and reinvent yourself. That's not at all your path. Yours is very meticulous, intentional, took a ton of discipline, work, all that stuff. But I do think there's this level of reaching some sort of height, and then, yeah, that fear of losing it. Um, I
I
think
think
that's
you
a
have to stay aggressive with what you're creating. You have to
mm,
not get too in your head about it. I am very I'm very lucky and I'm very happy about the success of Atomic Habits, but also it can just be a project that went well. It can just be a thing. It doesn't mean that it's everything or has to consume the rest of my life or whatever. Like
mm,
it was a project that I worked on for a few years and I gave it the very best effort that I could. And I hoped that I would produce the most comprehensive or useful book on habits at the end of it. And I don't know if I did that or not. It's up to the readers to decide, but I gave it my best shot. And now you can move on and go do something else. Like
yeah,
it doesn't have to define everything about you. So
yeah,
some of that is just keeping yourself in a healthy mental space about it. And then there's also this funny thing. Like everybody, I notice myself, oh, well, what will people think? Or like worried
mm,
about the expectations that people have. And I've come to notice that whenever I get trapped in that mindset of worrying about what the audience thinks or worrying about how people will judge the work or whatever, I am almost never worried about any specific person. If you were to come to me and ask me, like, oh, are you worried about what Alex thinks about like what you're going to make? And be like, well, no, like I'm not worried about like his particular opinion. Like, I don't think he would. What if you did something totally new, not related to habits at all? Do you think that he would hate that? Or you're worried that he like wouldn't respect you as a creator? And you're like, well, no, I'm not really worried about that person. And you come to realize once you try to make the fear specific in that way, that actually you're worried about like the collective you. You're worried about this vision of other people in the broad sense.
mm,
And as soon as you realize that, you're like, oh, it's a story that I'm making up. It's just in my head. There is no collective you. They're just a collection of individual people that I happen to know or not know that well. And if you go to any one of those individuals, it's not that big of a deal. And so you're like,
right.
okay, I'm just inventing all this. And that doesn't mean you don't fall into the trap. I still fall into the trap occasionally, but I do think it makes it easier for me to take a little bit of the pressure off and be like, just make the thing you want to make the thing that lights you up and worry less about the expectations that the audience is going to have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that's so helpful to hear. And I think just that storytelling, the stories we tell ourselves, especially about the outside world and their perception of you, like that is like the thing. I think most human beings, especially in the modern age, for people who are trying to create things, that is the thing to overcome, is the perception of others to do what's truthfully best for you.